So what are the major threats, to the bird populations?
Well, a major threat to any bird species is almost always habitat loss, just loss of a place to do its thing, whether it's on the breeding grounds, sometimes on wintering grounds if it's a migratory bird that goes somewhere else in the winter, even on its migratory stopovers, places it uses on its way along the migration. Habitat loss is almost always a primary factor with involved in bird declines.
And what about predation?
Well, yeah, predation is usually the highest cause of failure of bird nests. It's the biggest reason why nests can fail. And second to the habitat loss issue is invasive species. They are a problem for bird populations. Species that are invasive are those that are not, they didn't naturally evolve with the birds. They don't naturally occur. They're not native. Those are a big problem for birds.
And would that include the common house cat?
It would include the common house cat. Yeah, they are, the house cat, the birds did not evolve with cats. So it's not something that they have mechanisms to cope with. A lot of birds nest on the ground. A lot of birds feed on the ground. They're vulnerable to predation by cats. And so even though they evolve with other kinds of predators, foxes, coyotes, they're capable of sort of dealing with those to some extent. They're not used to cats, and especially the numbers of cats that we have these days.
And do we have any idea what that number is?
Well, there's been a lot of attempts to try to quantify that. It's a lot easier to quantify the number of, we have two sort of different types of cat populations. We have our pet cats that are in our homes, or at least are in our homes part of the day. Those have, those populations, about 40 years ago, we had about 30 million of them.
Now this is nationally.
This is, yes, I'm sorry, in the U.S., not Vermont. We don't have numbers specifically for Vermont.
No, we don't.
So, yeah, 40 years ago, we had about 30 million pet cats in the U.S. Since then, in the last 40 years, those populations have tripled. So we have about 90 million pet cats now in the U.S. Now, there's also this other population of cats that isn't associated with people's homes. They live outside, strays, feral cats. They may get fed by somebody, but they're essentially living in the barn, living out in the back 40, or they're just completely wild, feral, afraid of humans. You hardly ever see them. Those populations are much harder to get a handle on in terms of numbers. They've estimated those populations to be somewhere between 60 and 100 million cats nationwide in the country.
So that's a pretty wide estimate, meaning we really don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we know it's a pretty good chance it's between that. Those are based on studies that have gone out and tried to count cats in various different ways. And then used, there's studies that have done this that have used, numbers from different areas, because, you're going to have different densities of cats in different areas depending on whether you're in an urban area, rural area, et cetera. So they've taken as much information from as many different places as they can and come up with this estimate.
Okay, for the most part, do we think, or do people who look at this think that the feral cats are greater bird predators than the pet cats, the feral and wild and stray combined, or is that hard to figure out?
I think that's really hard to figure out. It's really hard to know how effective the feral cats are at depredating birds. But there's sort of some general stats thrown out about cats in general, because what happens with cats is that even though the cats associated with our homes, even though we feed them, they don't lose their instinct to kill. So they're still coming home with birds. I mean, we all have heard it, if not experienced it ourselves. They all bring home the birds, or sometimes they don't bring them home, which also makes it hard to get a handle on how many are taken. But it's been estimated, based on studies, that birds make up about, I think it's 30% of cats' diet when they're living in the wild. And that there's also been other studies that have looked at, well, how many birds are we talking about that cats take? And they've been a bit all over the map, as can be expected, depending on where they were carried out, how they were carried out. And the numbers have ranged from 4 birds per year to 54 birds per year.
Per cat?
Per cat. So, anywhere from 4 birds a year to a bird a week.
So what should a responsible cat owner who loves his or her cat but doesn't want it to do too much bird predation, what should that owner do?
We need to keep our cats inside. And I think there's a general, I see two different populations among cat owners. I see people who totally get that and are fine with that, and they have their cats inside. They feel their cats are happy. They give them toys to play with, and they feel that the cats are healthy and happy and safe. And there's another segment of the cat owner population that feels that their cats need to be outside in order to be happy. Well, they can still let their cats outside. They just need to do it with some constraints. They need to provide an enclosure, or they need to have the cat on the leash, even though it looks silly. I've always thought cats on leashes look silly because we're not used to it.
Right.
Or they need to be watching the cat when it's outside. It's really no different than what we do with dogs. We just have to train our mentality a little differently to get that idea over to cats. I think some people, that can be a pain. I don't want to build an enclosure so my cat can be outside. So sit outside with your cat. Or if your cat runs off, then you do have to deal with it somehow to keep it from doing that. And that's not just going to reduce cat predation on birds. It's also going to, on average, increase the life of your cat. Because cats that are kept indoors live on average up to 10 years. That's their lifespan. But cats that live outdoors exclusively anyway, they only live, their life expectancy is 2 years. So there's a lot
because they get predated or
they get
run
predated, they
over.
get hit by a car, they get disease, they encounter skunks or raccoons that are rabid. There's all kinds of risks out there to the cats. So I think it's not just better for the birds, but I think it's better for the cats. I really think that this is really a serious problem for wildlife. I think it's a serious problem for cats too, actually, to have all these feral cats roaming around who are disease prone. And I think some of the solutions, some groups have tried to come up with solutions that don't seem to be working. And I really think that all the stakeholders, all the interested parties need to really get together and sit down at the table and figure out how are we going to do this. There's no one single solution that's going to work, and it will require funds, and it will require effort, and it will require persistence to get things under control. But right now it's out of control and getting worse.